Hi everyone, Mrs. Ottiwell here. I'm going to share with you today one of my favourite books, which is called Mrs. Noah's Pockets, and it's by Jackie Morris and James Mayhew. You may recognise the name Jackie Morris. She's the author and illustrator who wrote Tell Me a Dragon, which the year ones and twos have just been reading, and also some books some of the older children might remember. The Ice Bear was one of them. Some great books, and the illustrations are just beautiful. But why I particularly like this story is it's a story about finding the value in everybody, and that's why I really like it. So here we go. Mrs. Noah's Pockets. It rained. Look at that. Look at all of that rain coming down. And there's Mrs. Noah standing on the hill watching the rain. Not the kind of rain that comes in a shower and then passes. This rain came from a sky, dark as a bruise, falling hard and fast, beating the earth, washing down tracks, making streams of pathways and rivers of roads. So what used to be a path is a flowing stream. You can see those running down the hills. And what used to be a road is like a river. And there's some animals and birds there watching the rain. They're probably wondering if it's ever going to end. Mr. Noah stood on a hill, saw the water rising, began to build an ark. This, he said, will be the ideal time to tidy up the world a bit. The ideal time to get rid of some of those more troublesome creatures. So there he is, building the ark with some people helping him, even somebody holding an umbrella over him. By day, Mr. Noah would draw out plans, hammer and saw at wood, steadily building the biggest boat the world had ever seen. You can see it there, it's the size of that hilltop. By night, he sat in a corner and made lists, one for all the animals who would sail with the ark, 2 of every kind, and one for the troublesome creatures that Mr. Noah wished to leave behind. I wonder what a troublesome creature is. All the time, Mrs. Noah watched Mr. Noah. She saw the plans, she watched as he worked. She saw the lists, and she smiled. She took out her sewing machine and began to stitch. She snipped, and she threaded, and she tacked, and she touched, and she stitched. How lovely, thought Mr. Noah. Mrs. Noah is making curtains for the windows of my ark. And Mrs. Noah just smiled. So there's Mr. Noah with his list of animals, and Mrs. Noah is stitching something and tucking something and using her sewing machine and some long red thread there that you can see. Whatever she's making is very large and multicoloured. Really interesting. When the ark was finished, Mr. Noah gathered together animals from all around the world, 2 by 2, and took them to the shelter out of the rain. So you can see some horses and some crocodiles and a tiger and an owl. I presume there's a friend of theirs as well coming along. And while Mr. Noah did that, Mrs. Noah went for one last walk, wading through water into the heart of the Mythico wood on errands of her own. So an errand is like a little job you do. So if you said, I'm going to go and do some errands, you might go to the shops to get some bread, you might go and post a letter, and you might go and drop something off to one of your neighbours. That's what an errand is. It's like a little job you need to do. At last, all were gathered inside the ark. It heaved with animals, large and small. Mr. Noah had been too busy and important to notice that there were no curtains at the window. Here he is, reading something with no curtains. Mrs. Noah wore a brand new coat. Here it is, look, see the purples? Stitched and snipped and tucked and turned with a hood and a cape and lots of pockets, very deep pockets. Can you see all the pockets in her cape? It looks very beautiful. And here's all the animals gathered on the ark. It looks like a little bit of a squash. And still it rained. The hollows of the land began to fill. Lakes formed in valleys. The water rose higher and higher until it tickled the base of the boat where it rested on the hill. So you can just see a little bit of that hill is left. That's how much it's rained. The water lifted it. They began to float. Mr. Noah cut the ropes. There he is, cutting the ropes. He cut the ropes that held the ark at anchor, and away they drifted. So to drift means to move along slowly. Oh, look at that. There's a mermaid there. My goodness. The rain beat on the roof, great rods of battering rain. All the animals and Mr. Noah and the children sheltered in the dry of the ark. Mrs. Noah stood on the prow. The prow is the very front of a ship or a boat. Even the prow of this ship is shaped like a bird. How pretty is that? Mrs. Noah stood on the prow, wearing her hood up, umbrella in hand, watching the dolphins and the mermaids racing in the waves. Here they are. I think it's still raining as well. Still rain coming down. Every evening after all the animals had been cared for, when the owls began their evening song, Mr. Noah would fall asleep. Mrs. Noah would gather the children around and tell them tales of dragons and unicorns, griffin and phoenix, centaurs and jackalopes, woolpatingas, and all manner of things. Now and again, Mr. Noah would wake and mutter, "Bah, unicorns! Troublesome creatures." The children sometimes thought that they could see things moving deep in Mrs. Noah's pockets. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Then one morning, everyone awoke to silence. The rain had stopped. The clouds began to roll away, and the sky was a most beautiful cornflower blue. Even the sun's come out, and you can see it glistening there, shining onto the sea. Well, it wasn't the sea, was it? But it became the sea because of all the rain. Everyone waited. Everyone watched as Mr. Noah sent out a raven to search for land. Later that day, the raven came back. There was no land anywhere. It seemed that the world had drowned in all the rain. And look, you can see buildings here that have been submerged. That means they've been taken underwater. They've been submerged by all the rain that there was. And the raven can't find any dry land. The ark sailed on. Mr. Noah sent out a dove. High, high in the clear blue sky, they all watched until she disappeared. There's the children watching, look. Much later that day, as the sun coloured the sea to glow with gold, over the water she came. In her beak was a small twig of green olive. I wonder what that meant, if she'd found a twig, a green twig. The next day they followed the dove until the ark came to rest on the tip of a mountain. All the animals spilled out onto the land as Mr. Noah watched and smiled. So much tidier without those troublesome ones. Mrs. Noah, here's her coat. Look how long her coat is. Mrs. Noah, her coattails flapping in the warm wind, wandered away from the ark into a wood that grew close by. Here, one at a time, she emptied her pockets, being very careful to lift the creatures all out, setting them free, 2 by 2, into the new land. Look at the creatures that she's setting free. They don't look like lions and tigers and rabbits and horses. I wonder what type of creatures they are that she set free. Oh, my own little creatures have just come back from their walk. So that is the end of the story, and here are the creatures that Mrs. Noah set free. And I think you'll see from the pictures that deep into her pockets, Mrs. Noah had hidden all the troublesome creatures that Mr. Noah didn't want to take with him, because every creature is beautiful and precious and special in its own way. I hope you like the story, and maybe you'll find out about more Jackie Morris books to read.